The bullet shattered Elias Boone's kitchen window at the exact moment he realized he'd made the worst mistake of his life, opening his door to strangers. Glass exploded inward as the girl screamed, throwing herself over her brother. Elias hit the floor, rifle already in hand, while gunfire tore through the Wyoming darkness outside. 3 days ago, his ranch had been silent as a grave. Now blood spotted his floorboards and 2 terrified children huddled behind his table, while men with murder in their voices surrounded his home. He thought the war was over. He thought he could finally be left alone. He'd been wrong about everything. If you're drawn into this tale of survival, redemption, and the family we choose when blood fails us, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story of courage travels across this country of ours. The sun hung low over the Absaroka Range, painting the Montana sky in shades of copper and ash. Elias Boone stood on his porch, coffee grown cold in his tin cup, watching the light die same as it did every evening. 43 years old and feeling every one of them in his bones. The ranch sprawled quiet around him, 200 acres of grass and memory, cattle lowing in the distance, and not another human voice for 5 miles in any direction. That was how he preferred it. The war had ended 4 years back, but Elias still carried it in the limp of his left leg and the way his hand shook some mornings. He'd come home to find his wife Sarah and their daughter Emma taken by fever the winter he was gone. The house still held their things, Sarah's sewing basket beside the rocker, Emma's corn-husk doll on the mantel. He couldn't bring himself to move them. Some days he forgot they were gone. Most days he wished he could. He was turning to go inside when he saw them. 2 figures coming up the road in the failing light, one tall and thin, one small. They moved slow, like walking hurt. Between them limped a horse so worn down its ribs showed even from a distance. Elias set down his cup and watched them come. Strangers were rare out here. Strangers on foot were rarer still. As they drew closer, details emerged. The tall one was a girl, maybe 15 or 16, wearing a dress that had once been blue but was now the color of dust and desperation. Her dark hair hung loose and tangled past her shoulders. The small one was a boy, couldn't be more than 8, clinging to the girl's hand like it was the only solid thing in the world. His face was pale, eyes too large. The girl stopped at the base of his porch steps. Up close, Elias could see the exhaustion carved into her features, the way her shoulders trembled with more than just cold. But her chin was lifted, jaw set with determination that didn't match her age. "Sir," she said, voice hoarse but steady, "we don't mean to trouble you. We just need to sleep in your barn tonight. We'll be gone by first light." Elias studied them both. The boy swayed on his feet, eyes glassy. The horse's head drooped nearly to the ground. These weren't drifters or troublemakers. These were people running from something. "Barn's got holes in the roof," Elias said finally. "Storm's coming in tonight." The girl's face tightened, but she nodded. "We've slept in worse. We won't be any trouble, I promise." "Where are your folks?" Something flickered across her expression. Grief, fear, both. "Dead, sir." "Where you headed?" "North." She didn't elaborate. Elias looked at the boy again. The child hadn't spoken, hadn't even looked up. Just stood there shivering despite the evening warmth, one small hand gripping his sister's dress. Every instinct told Elias to send them on. He'd learned the hard way that caring about people only led to losing them. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to point them toward town and close his door. But there was something in the girl's eyes, something familiar. The same desperate courage Sarah had worn the day she'd told him she was pregnant with Emma, knowing how little they had, knowing how hard the life would be. The same fierce protectiveness he'd seen in his daughter's face when she'd found an injured bird and insisted on nursing it back to health. "You got names?" he asked. The girl hesitated, then lifted her chin higher. "Mara. This is my brother Luke." "Mara." Elias rolled the name around, tasted it. "That's a strong name." "Our mother chose it." "Your mother had good sense." He sighed, knowing he was about to make a mistake. "Barn's no place for children in a storm. There's a room inside. Hasn't been used in a while, but it's warm and dry." Mara's eyes widened. "Sir, we couldn't—" "You could, and you will." Boy looks about ready to drop. Get him inside, get him fed. Morning comes. You can decide what you want to do. For a moment, Mara just stared at him. Then her face crumpled slightly, that hard-won composure cracking just enough to show the terrified child beneath. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. Elias waved her gratitude away, uncomfortable. Get inside. I'll see to your horse. He took the animal's reins while Mara guided Luke up the steps. The boy moved like he was sleepwalking, unsteady and vacant. Elias frowned. That wasn't just exhaustion, that was something else. Inside, he pointed them toward the wash basin. Clean up. I'll get food on. He'd been living on coffee and whatever he could heat quick. Beans, hardtack, salt pork. But somewhere in the back of his mind, Sarah's voice scolded him. Children need proper food, Elias Boone, not your bachelor nonsense. He found eggs, bacon, the last of yesterday's bread. While it cooked, he heard water splashing, quiet murmuring from Mara to her brother. The sounds felt foreign in his kitchen, like words in a language he'd forgotten he knew. When they emerged, faces scrubbed pink, Elias gestured to the table. Sit. Mara helped Luke into a chair, then sat beside him. The boy stared at the plate Elias set before him like he wasn't sure what to do with it. Luke, Mara said softly, you need to eat. The child picked up his fork with trembling hands, took one bite, then another. Then he was eating with single-minded focus, like he hadn't seen food in days. Probably hadn't. Elias sat across from them, watching. Mara ate slower, more carefully, but with the same underlying hunger. She kept one hand on her brother's shoulder, steady and protective. How long you been traveling? Elias asked. 5 days? Mara didn't look up from her plate. Maybe 6. Lost count. Long way on foot. Yes, sir. What you running from? Her hand stilled on her fork. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, people who want to hurt us. Law? No. The word came out sharp, almost angry. We didn't do anything wrong. Didn't say you did, but there's usually a reason folks run. Mara's jaw tightened. She glanced at Luke, something protective and pained crossing her face. Our parents owned land, good land, with water rights. When they died, it should have passed to us. But our uncle, he wanted it for himself. So he's looking for you. He's looking to make sure we can't claim what's ours. She met Elias's eyes then, and he saw the truth there, plain as day. He's looking to make sure we can't tell anyone what really happened to our parents. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Elias set down his coffee, studying the girl's face. She wasn't lying. He'd seen enough lies in the war to know the shape of them. You saying your uncle killed your folks? I'm saying my parents didn't die in their sleep like the sheriff ruled. I'm saying the night they died, I heard shouting. Heard my father say, you'll get nothing from me, Marcus. Then I heard gunshots. Her voice stayed level, controlled, but her knuckles were white around her fork. I grabbed Luke and ran, hid in the root cellar until morning. When I came out, the sheriff was there with my uncle. They said it was a tragedy, an accident, said my father's gun misfired while he was cleaning it. You tell the sheriff what you heard? I tried. He said I was confused, traumatized, that children don't understand these things. Bitterness twisted her mouth. My uncle was very sympathetic, said he'd take us in, care for us like his own. But that night, I heard him talking to someone, heard him say we couldn't stay alive to inherit, that accidents happen to children all the time. Elias felt a familiar cold anger settling into his chest. He'd seen this before, in the war and after, men who wore respectability like a coat while their hands stayed bloody underneath. So you ran. So I ran. Mara looked at her brother, whose head was drooping toward his plate. Luke hasn't spoken since that night. Not one word. I don't know if he ever will again. Elias absorbed this, turning it over. He'd told himself he wanted no part of other people's troubles. But here was trouble sitting at his table, wearing a child's face, asking for nothing but a night's shelter. The law won't help you? The law is my uncle's friend. They drink together, play cards together. Who are they going to believe, an important rancher or his orphaned niece with wild accusations? She was right. Elias had seen that story play out too many times. Power protected power. Truth was just whatever version suited those with guns and money. You got a plan? He asked. Beyond running north? Mara's composure finally cracked. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. I was going to find work in the mining camps. They say they hire anyone up there. I thought maybe we could disappear. Start over with new names. Maybe Luke would start talking again if we were safe. She wiped at her eyes angrily. I know it's not much of a plan, but it's all I have. Elias looked at her. This fierce, frightened girl who'd grabbed her traumatized brother and run into the wilderness with nothing but hope and desperation. Then he looked at Luke, the silent boy who'd watched his parents die and lost his voice to grief. He thought of Emma's doll on the mantel, of Sarah's empty chair, of 4 years spent alone in a house full of ghosts. Rooms through there, he said finally, pointing toward the back hall. Used to be my daughter's. Bed's made. Should be clean enough. Mara blinked at him. Sir? Storm's coming in. Hear it? Now that he'd mentioned it, the wind was picking up outside, rattling the windows. You'll stay tonight. Morning. We'll figure out the rest. But you said... I said a lot of things. Now I'm saying get that boy to bed before he falls asleep in his plate. Mara stood slowly, pulling Luke up with her. The boy swayed, eyes already closing. Thank you, she said again. I don't know how we'll ever repay. Don't want repayment, just want you both alive come morning. Elias stood, gathering plates. Go on now. Door latches from inside if it makes you feel safer. He watched them disappear down the hall, heard the door close softly. Then he stood alone in his kitchen, listening to wind build against the walls and wondering what the hell he'd just done. The storm hit around midnight. Rain hammered the roof, thunder rolled across the mountains. Elias lay in his bed, staring at ceiling boards he'd memorized years ago, listening to the house breathe around him. For the first time in 4 years, it didn't sound empty. He woke to silence. The storm had passed, leaving the world scrubbed clean and dripping. Dawn light filtered weak and gray through his window. Elias dressed, limped out to the kitchen. Empty. He moved to the back hall, knocked on Emma's door. No answer. He opened it. The bed was made neat, like no one had slept there. The room was empty. They were gone. For a moment, Elias just stood there, hand on the doorframe, looking at that empty bed. Of course they'd left. Why would they stay? They had their plan. Run north, disappear. He'd given them shelter for a night, nothing more. He should feel relieved, should be glad his life could return to its quiet pattern of coffee and cattle and carefully maintained solitude. Instead, he felt something twist in his chest, something that felt dangerously close to loss. You old fool, he told himself, getting attached to strangers in a single night. But he found himself walking outside anyway, scanning the horizon, looking for 2 small figures heading north. He didn't see them. What he saw instead made his blood run cold. Tracks in the mud. Boot prints, large and deep. Several sets. Men had come during the storm, circled his house, stood outside his windows. He followed the tracks to the barn. The door hung open. Inside, Mara's horse was gone. But there, in the back stall, huddled behind a pile of hay, Luke. The boy sat curled into himself, arms wrapped around his knees, shaking, alone. Elias approached slowly. Luke, where's your sister? The boy didn't respond, didn't even look up, but he was shaking harder now, whole body trembling. Luke, Elias crouched down, ignoring the protest of his bad leg. Son, I need you to show me where Mara went. Finally, the boy lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, terrified. He raised one shaking hand and pointed north. Elias felt that cold anger return, sharper this time. She went after the horse? Luke nodded. Alone? Another nod. Damn it! Elias stood, mind racing. The girl had probably woken early, found the horse gone, realized someone had been here. Had she thought Elias betrayed them? Or had she gone after their only means of travel, knowing they couldn't make it north on foot? Either way, she'd walked straight into danger. Stay here, Elias told Luke. Don't move. Don't make noise. Understand? The boy nodded, eyes huge. Elias grabbed his rifle, his coat, followed the tracks north into the timber. The trail was clear, 2 horses riding hard. One set of smaller footprints following. He found her a mile out. She sat against a pine tree, one hand pressed to her side, the other gripping a rock like she thought she might need it as a weapon. Her face was pale, lips pressed tight against pain. Blood seeped between her fingers. "Mr. Boone." Her voice came out weak but defiant. "You should go back. They'll come looking." Elias crossed to her, knelt down. "Let me see." "I'm fine." "You're bleeding. Let me see." She reluctantly moved her hand. The wound wasn't deep, looked like she'd caught herself on a branch running through the trees, but it needed cleaning. More concerning was the fever flush on her cheeks, the way her eyes weren't quite focusing right. "Did you find them?" Elias asked. "The men who took your horse?" "They found me first." She tried to smile, failed. "Guess I'm not as good at tracking as I thought." "They hurt you?" "One grabbed me. I fought, fell." She gestured vaguely at the wound. "They laughed, said my uncle sends his regards, said he's been looking for us, said—" She swallowed hard. "Said he's offering a reward, $500 for information, $1,000 for delivery." Elias's jaw tightened. "They take the horse?" "They took everything. Our supplies, what little money I had hidden. Said we wouldn't need it where we were going." Her voice broke. "Luke, is Luke—" "He's safe, hiding in the barn." Relief flooded her face so profound it was painful to witness. Then her eyes rolled back and she slumped sideways. Elias caught her, felt the fever burning through her clothes. Damn it. Wound was infected already, or she was sick from exposure. Either way, she needed help. He lifted her as gently as he could, started back toward the ranch. She barely weighed anything, this girl who'd tried to be strong enough to save them both. By the time he reached the barn, she was delirious, mumbling about her mother, about running, about someone named Marcus coming with fire. Luke emerged from the shadows, saw his sister limp in Elias's arms, and his face went white. "She's alive," Elias said quickly, "but she's sick. Help me get her inside." Between them, they got Mara into the house, into Emma's bed. Elias sent Luke for water, for clean cloths. He cleaned the wound, wrapped it tight, then pressed cool rags to her burning forehead. She thrashed and mumbled through the afternoon. Luke sat beside her, holding her hand, silent tears tracking down his face. Elias made broth, made tea, tried to get liquid into her when she was calm enough. All the while his mind worked through the situation. Men were looking for these children, men willing to hunt them down for money. An uncle who'd killed their parents and now wanted them dead too. A whole system, law, society, power, arrayed against two orphans who had nothing but each other. The smart thing would be to bundle them up, take them to town, let someone else deal with it, wash his hands of the whole mess. But Elias looked at Luke's tear-stained face, at Mara fighting fever with the same desperate courage she'd shown at his door, and he thought about Sarah, about how she'd never turned away from someone in need, about Emma, who'd cried when birds died and laughed when flowers bloomed. He'd lost his family, lost his reason for caring about anything beyond survival. But maybe that meant he had nothing left to lose. "Luke," he said quietly. The boy looked up. "Your sister's going to be fine. But I need you to understand something. Those men will come back. Your uncle won't stop looking. If you stay here, there will be trouble." Luke's face crumpled. He started to stand, to back away. "Wait." Elias held up a hand. "I'm not telling you to leave. I'm telling you that if you stay, I'm going to protect you. Both of you. But that means I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Luke stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. "Good." Elias looked at Mara, at this fierce girl who'd reminded him what it meant to care about something beyond his own grief. "Because I'm done running from ghosts, and I'll be damned if I let anyone hurt you or your sister while you're under my roof." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Another storm coming. But inside, for the first time in 4 years, Elias Boone felt something like purpose stirring in his chest. He'd opened his door to strangers. Now he'd stand between them and whatever darkness was coming, even if it killed him. The fever would break by morning. The real danger would come 3 days later. But for now, in this moment, 3 people who'd all lost everything found themselves under one roof. Not yet a family, not quite strangers. Just 3 souls deciding, each in their own way, that maybe survival wasn't enough. Maybe some things were worth fighting for after all. Mara's fever broke just before dawn on the third day. Elias was dozing in the chair beside her bed when he heard her voice, weak but clear. "Luke?" Elias opened his eyes. She was looking around the room, confused but conscious. "Your brother's sleeping in my room. Didn't want to leave the house, but I convinced him he needed rest." She turned her head toward him, wincing at the movement. "How long?" 3 days. You had us worried." "Us?" She tested the word, something flickering across her face. "You stayed." "Where else would I go? It's my house." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You know what I mean." Elias stood, joints protesting. "I'll get you some broth. You need to eat." "Mr. Boone." Her voice stopped him at the door. "Thank you for everything." He didn't turn around. "Get your strength back. We'll talk then." In the kitchen, he heated the broth he'd kept ready, added a piece of bread softened in warm milk. When he returned, Mara was sitting up, though the effort clearly cost her, her hand pressed against the bandage at her side. "Here." He helped her hold the bowl, watched her take slow, careful sips. Color was already returning to her cheeks. "You're stronger than you look." "Had to be." She took another sip. "After Mama died, Papa, he tried, but he was drowning in his own grief. Someone had to keep things running, keep Luke fed and clean and safe." Her eyes darkened. "Lot of good it did." "You got him out alive. That's not nothing." "Got him out into a nightmare, running, hiding, watching his sister collapse in the woods." She set down the bowl, hands shaking. "Some protector I turned out to be." "You're 16 years old and you've done more than most grown men could manage. Don't diminish that." She looked at him then, really looked. "Why are you helping us? You don't know us. We're nothing but trouble." Elias was quiet for a long moment. "Had a daughter once. She'd be about your age now if the fever hadn't taken her. She was brave like you, stubborn like you too." He picked up the empty bowl. "Maybe I'm helping you because I couldn't help her. Maybe I'm just tired of being alone. Does it matter?" "It matters to me." "Then let's say I don't like bullies. Never have. And a man who'd kill his own brother for land and hunt down children to cover it up, that's about the worst kind of bully there is." Mara's eyes filled with tears. "You believe me about what happened?" "I believe you." "The sheriff didn't. Said I was hysterical, making up stories because I was grieving." "The sheriff's either a fool or a coward. Maybe both." Elias moved toward the door. "Rest now. I'll bring Luke in when he wakes." "Mr. Boone?" He paused. "What happens now? When I'm better?" "Now we figure out how to keep you both alive. And maybe, if we're lucky, how to make sure your uncle answers for what he did." Her eyes widened. "You can't go up against him. He has money, influence, men who'll do whatever he asks." "I've faced worse." The lie came easy. Truth was, Elias wasn't sure what they were facing, but he'd made his choice 3 nights ago when he'd let these children through his door. Too late to turn back now. Luke appeared in the hallway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. When he saw Mara awake, his whole face transformed. He ran to her, climbed carefully onto the bed, wrapped his arms around her neck. "Hey, little bird," she whispered, holding him close. "I'm okay. I'm okay." Elias left them there, brother and sister clinging to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. In the kitchen, he poured coffee and stood at the window, watching morning spread across his land. Somewhere out there, men were looking for these children, men with guns and horses and the weight of corrupt law behind them. He'd need help, couldn't do this alone. The thought settled uncomfortably. Elias had spent 4 years avoiding his neighbors, dodging invitations to gatherings, keeping to himself. But there were good men in these mountains, men who'd fought in the war, who understood honor and protecting what was right. Men who wouldn't stand by while children were hunted. First, though, he needed information, needed to know exactly what they were up against. 3 days later, Mara was walking without wincing, and Luke was starting to explore the ranch, though he never strayed far from his sister. Elias found them in the barn, Mara showing Luke how to curry the old mare he kept for light work. "I'm riding into town," Elias announced. "Thought you might want to come along. Stay close where I can see you. Mara's hand stilled on the brush. Town is dangerous. Someone might recognize us. Town is also where we'll hear news, where we'll find out what your uncle's saying, what story he's spreading. He leaned against the stall door. Besides, I'm thinking it's time folks saw you. Time they knew you're under my protection. That'll put a target on you, too. Target's already there. Might as well make it official. She studied him, weighing something. You really mean to stand with us? Said I would, didn't I? People say a lot of things. Most don't mean them when it gets hard. I'm not most people. Elias pushed off the door. Get cleaned up. We leave in an hour. The ride to town took most of the morning. Elias kept them to the main road, visible and unhidden. Let anyone watching see that these children were with him, under his care. Luke rode in front of Elias, small hands gripping the saddle horn. Mara rode the old mare, sitting straight back despite her healing wound. The town of Bent Creek wasn't much. A main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, a sheriff's office, and a dozen houses scattered around like seeds blown on the wind. But it was the center of their small world, the place where news traveled and decisions were made. Elias felt eyes on them the moment they rode in. Mrs. Henderson stopped sweeping her porch to stare. Old Tom Pritchard paused mid-stride outside the saloon, mouth falling open. Even the dogs seemed to quiet, watching. They hitched the horses outside the general store. Elias helped Luke down, then offered Mara a steadying hand she pretended not to need. Inside the store smelled of coffee and sawdust and leather. Samuel Yates stood behind the counter, weighing out flour for a customer. When he saw Elias, his weathered face creased into a smile. Elias Boone, been months since you darkened my door. Then his eyes shifted to the children and his smile faltered. Who's this you got with you? These are my guests, Elias said evenly. Mara and Luke. They'll be staying with me for a spell. Samuel's gaze lingered on Mara's face, and Elias saw the moment recognition sparked. Guests, Samuel repeated slowly. That's so. It is. Elias pulled out his list. Need these supplies. Take your time. While Samuel gathered goods, Elias felt the weight of unspoken questions in the air. The other customer, a ranch hand Elias recognized but didn't know by name, kept glancing at them, then away, like he was trying to place a half-remembered face. Mara stayed close to Luke, one hand on his shoulder, her expression carefully neutral. But Elias could see tension in the line of her spine, the way her eyes tracked every movement in the store. Heard some interesting news last week, Samuel said conversationally, weighing out sugar. Down south, near the territorial line. Rancher named Marcus Hutchins lost his niece and nephew. Orphans they were. Wandered off in the night, poor man's beside himself, offering a reward for information. The air in the store went very still. That's so, Elias said, voice flat. $1,000, they say. For anyone who can bring them home safe. Samuel looked up, met Elias's eyes. Lot of money. Money's not everything, Sam. No, but it's something. Samuel wrapped the sugar in brown paper, set it on the counter. Man's got friends, too. Important friends. Sheriff rode down there himself to help with the search. They say the children might have been confused, traumatized, might not understand they're in danger out here alone. Mara's hand tightened on Luke's shoulder. The boy pressed closer to her side. Children aren't alone, Elias said quietly. Children are exactly where they need to be. Samuel's hands stilled. He looked at Elias for a long moment, then at Mara, then back to Elias. Something passed between them, an old understanding, the kind that came from years of knowing a man's character. You're sure about this, Elias? Man like Hutchins, he's got reach, got resources. I'm sure. Could get messy. Most worthwhile things do. Samuel nodded slowly, then finished packing the supplies. Your credit's good here. Always has been. He pushed the packages across the counter. And Elias? That story about confused children wandering off. I never believed it for a second. Hutchins always struck me as the kind of man who'd smile while he slit your throat. Relief flickered across Mara's face. Elias gathered the supplies, divided them between Luke and Mara to carry. Appreciate the honesty, Sam. One more thing. Samuel leaned across the counter, voice dropping. Jack Morrison was in here yesterday. He's running freight up from the territorial line. Said he passed 2 men on the North Road asking questions about strangers traveling through. Described a girl and a boy pretty specifically. Elias felt cold settle into his gut. They still around? Moved on toward the high country, but Jack said they didn't strike him as the giving up type. Good to know. Elias tipped his hat. We'll be seeing you, Sam. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright, too exposed. Elias loaded the supplies onto the horses, aware of faces in windows, figures pausing in doorways. The whole town would know by evening that Elias Boone had brought Marcus Hutchins' missing niece and nephew into Bent Creek, bold as brass. They were untying the horses when Sheriff Dawes emerged from his office across the street. He was a thick-built man in his 50s, with a belly that spoke of too much time sitting and a face that wore authority like an ill-fitting coat. Boone. He crossed toward them, thumbs hooked in his belt. Heard you had visitors. Sheriff. Elias didn't move, didn't step away from the children. Dawes' eyes traveled over Mara and Luke, lingering. Funny thing, these young folks matched the description of 2 missing children from down south. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? I know 2 children showed up at my ranch needing shelter. I gave it to them. Noble of you. So Dawes shifted his weight, hand resting near his gun. Not threatening, but noticeable. But those children belong with their uncle. Man's worried sick. He's asking for help bringing them home. They are home, Elias said flatly. That's not your decision to make. It's not Marcus Hutchins' decision either. These are his brother's children. They have legal claim to their father's estate. Dawes' expression hardened. You making accusations, Boone? I'm stating facts. Man's brother dies. Man tries to claim guardianship of the children while also claiming the property they inherited. Convenient timing. You calling Marcus Hutchins a murderer? Dawes' hand dropped to his gun now, open and clear. Because that's a serious charge, one you better be able to back up. Mara stepped forward, voice ringing clear despite her fear. I can back it up. I heard him that night. Heard him arguing with my father. Heard gunshots. When I came out of hiding, he was there with you, Sheriff, telling me how sorry he was, how it was all a terrible accident. You were confused, Dawes said, but there was something uncertain in his voice now. Traumatized. You didn't know what you were saying. I knew exactly what I was saying. You just didn't want to hear it. Girl, you better watch your tone. Sheriff, Elias's voice cut through, cold as winter. You touch these children, you'll answer to me. You try to take them, you'll have to go through me. And I promise you that won't end well for anyone. Dawes' face flushed red. You threatening a lawman? I'm protecting 2 orphans who've done nothing wrong except survive something they shouldn't have had to witness. If that puts me against you, so be it. For a moment, the street was silent except for the wind moving through the wooden buildings. People had gathered now, watching from doorways and windows. The saloon door swung open and 3 men stepped out, faces hard. Elias recognized 2 of them, drifters, the kind who do anything for coin. This isn't over, Dawes said finally. Marcus Hutchins has legal guardianship. Papers were drawn up proper. When he hears his niece and nephew are here, he'll come for them. And you won't have any choice but to hand them over. Then let him come. We'll settle it then. Dawes stared at him, jaw working. Then he spat into the dust and stalked back toward his office. The 3 men from the saloon watched a moment longer, then drifted back inside. Elias turned to find half the town standing in doorways, witnessing. Let them see. Let them talk. Let Marcus Hutchins hear that Elias Boone wasn't hiding, wasn't running, wasn't afraid. We should go, Mara said quietly, before he comes back with more men. No. Elias swung into his saddle. We're going to make one more stop. He rode them to the far end of town, to a small house with a neat garden and curtains in the windows. He dismounted, knocked on the door. A woman answered, maybe 40, with kind eyes and capable hands. Elias Boone. It's been too long. Mary. He removed his hat. Need to ask you something. It's important. Mary Carson had been Sarah's friend, had helped nurse Emma through her final days. She looked past Elias to the children waiting on the horses, and understanding dawned on her face. Come inside, she said. All of you. In her kitchen, over coffee and cookies that Luke ate with silent wonder, Elias explained. Mary listened without interrupting, her expression growing grimmer with each detail. When he finished, she looked at Mara. Child, you're telling the truth? Every word, Mara said. And you, Elias? You're sure about standing against Marcus Hutchins, against the sheriff? I'm sure. Mary was quiet for a moment, hands wrapped around her cup. Then she nodded. My husband died in the war, left me this house, a small inheritance. I've lived quiet since then, but quiet doesn't mean cowardly. She looked at Mara again. You need someone to speak for you, someone respectable with standing in this community. I'll do it. Mary, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to. Sarah would have done the same. She stood, brushing cookie crumbs from her apron. I'll start talking to people. The church ladies, the merchants. There are good people in this town who won't stand for children being hurt, no matter how much money's involved. It could get dangerous, Elias warned. Everything worth doing is dangerous. You taught me that yourself, telling stories about the war. She smiled, sad and determined. Go home. Keep those children safe. I'll work here. Outside, mounting the horses again, Mara looked at Elias with something like awe. You're really doing this. Building a defense. Building a family, Elias corrected. That's what you do for family. You stand. They rode home as the sun dropped toward the mountains, painting the world gold and crimson. Luke fell asleep against Elias's chest, small and trusting. Mara rode beside them, quiet but no longer alone. When the ranch came into view, Elias felt something shift in his chest. For 4 years, this place had been a tomb where he waited to join his dead. Now it was something else, something worth defending. They put the horses away, carried supplies inside. Mara made dinner while Elias showed Luke how to split kindling, patient with the boy's small hands and uncertain swings. They ate together as darkness fell, and for the first time since Sarah and Emma died, Elias's table felt full. Later, after the children were asleep, Elias sat on his porch with his rifle across his knees and watched the stars emerge. Somewhere out there, Marcus Hutchins was hearing that his niece and nephew had been found. Somewhere, men were saddling horses and checking ammunition. Let them come. Elias had spent 4 years mourning the family he'd lost. He hadn't expected to find a reason to fight again, hadn't expected to care whether he lived or died. But these children, this fierce girl and her silent brother, they'd walked up his road and reminded him what it meant to protect something, what it felt like to matter to someone again. He wouldn't let them down. Whatever was coming, however bad it got, he'd stand between them and the darkness, even if it cost him everything. Because some things, some people, were worth dying for. And maybe, just maybe, they were worth living for too. The riders came on the 5th day. Elias spotted them from the ridgeline where he'd been checking fence posts with Luke trailing behind him like a shadow. 5 men on horseback, moving with purpose up the valley road. Even from a distance, he could see the glint of rifles and saddle scabbards. Luke. He kept his voice calm, but the boy heard the urgency underneath. Run back to the house. Tell your sister to get inside and stay away from the windows. Go now. Luke's eyes went wide, but he didn't hesitate. He took off running, small legs pumping, disappearing over the rise toward the ranch house. Elias watched the riders come, calculating distance and time. Maybe 20 minutes before they reached his property line. He could make it back to the house in 10 if he ran. That gave him time to prepare, to fortify, to make damn sure Mara and Luke were safe before whatever was about to happen happened. He moved fast down the slope, ignoring the protest in his bad leg. By the time he reached the house, Mara had already pulled Luke inside and was standing at the window with his old cavalry pistol in her hand. I found it in your trunk, she said when she saw his expression. Figured if men were coming, we'd need more than good intentions. You know how to use that? My father taught me. Said a woman on the frontier needed to know how to protect herself. Her hands were steady on the gun, but fear flickered in her eyes. Is it him, my uncle? Don't know yet. But 5 armed men riding this direction with intent, it's not a social call. Elias moved to his gun cabinet, pulled out his rifle and the shotgun he kept for close work. I need you to take Luke and go down to the root cellar. There's a tunnel there, old Indian trail that comes out near the creek bed. You remember where I showed you? I remember, but I'm not hiding while you face them alone. Mara? No. She turned to face him fully, chin lifted in that stubborn way he'd come to recognize. You've done enough. You've given us shelter, protection, stood up to the whole damn town for us. I won't let you die because of me. And I won't let them take you. So you're going to do as I say and get down in that cellar with your brother. Mr. Boone, Elias. He checked the rifle's chamber, loaded rounds with practiced efficiency. If we're about to fight side by side, you might as well use my name. That stopped her. She blinked, then nodded. Elias, at least let me stay until we know what they want. If it's just talk, no reason to hide. If it's trouble, she hefted the pistol. Then I can shoot just as well as any man. He wanted to argue, wanted to order her into that cellar and bar the door, but there was steel in her eyes that reminded him of Sarah, and he knew that look. Knew there was no moving someone who'd made up their mind. Fine. But Luke goes down now, and if shooting starts, you follow him. Understood? Understood. They got Luke into the cellar with a lantern and strict instructions to stay quiet. The boy's face was white, but he didn't cry, didn't protest, just nodded and disappeared down into the darkness. Elias and Mara took positions on opposite sides of the main room, each with a clear view of the approach. The minutes crawled past, marked by the thud of hoofbeats growing closer. When the riders crested the final rise, Elias got his first clear look at them. The man in front was tall and well-dressed, sitting his horse like he owned the world beneath it. Even from inside the house, Elias could see the family resemblance in the shape of his jaw, the set of his shoulders. This was Marcus Hutchins. Beside him rode Sheriff Dawes, looking uncomfortable and official all at once. The other three were hired guns, no question. They had that hard, empty look of men who'd killed before and would do it again for the right price. The group stopped 50 yards from the house. Marcus Hutchins sat easy in his saddle, surveying the ranch with the calculating eye of a man appraising property he intended to own. Elias Boone, his voice carried clear and strong. I'm Marcus Hutchins. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle held casual but ready. Nothing here belongs to you, Hutchins. My niece and nephew would disagree, poor children running off in their grief. But they're safe now, thank the Lord. I've come to bring them home. They are home. Marcus's smile was cold. Now, that's where you're wrong. I'm their legal guardian. I have papers, signed and witnessed. Sheriff Dawes here can confirm it. Dawes nodded, miserable but compliant. It's true, Boone. The court awarded guardianship to Mr. Hutchins. You got no legal right to keep those children. The court didn't hear the children's testimony. Didn't hear what Mara saw the night her parents died. Something flickered across Marcus's face, too quick to name. The ravings of a traumatized child. The sheriff investigated thoroughly. My brother's death was a tragic accident, nothing more. Funny how you're so eager to get the children back then. If it was just an accident, why hire guns to track them down? Why offer a $1,000 reward? Because I care about their welfare. Because I want my family safe. Marcus's voice hardened. Now, you can do this easy or hard, Boone. Send the children out and we'll leave peacefully. Refuse, and you're harboring runaways and obstructing a lawful guardian's rights. That's a crime. So is murder. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. The three hired men shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward weapons. Dawes went pale. That's a serious accusation, Marcus said softly. I could have you arrested for slander. Do it then. Let's go to a real court, not your bought and paid for territorial judge. Let's hear what Mara has to say in front of a jury. Let's examine the evidence of how your brother really died. There is no evidence. There's just a disturbed girl with a wild imagination and a lonely old man who's latched onto her lies. Elias felt rage building behind his ribs but kept his voice level. The children stay with me. You want them, you'll have to take them. Oh, I intend to. Marcus nodded to the men beside him. Mr. Boone is clearly disturbed. Help me retrieve my niece and nephew. Use whatever force is necessary. The three hired guns dismounted, spreading out to flank the house. Dawes stayed mounted, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Sheriff, Elias called, you really going to let this happen? You going to stand by while innocent children are handed over to the man who killed their parents? I'm enforcing the law, Dawes said, but there was no conviction in it. You're enforcing whatever Marcus Hutchins pays you to enforce. One of the hired guns was moving toward the barn, trying to circle around back. Another headed for the root cellar entrance. The third came straight at the porch, rifle up. Last chance, Boone, Marcus called. Send them out now. Elias raised his rifle. Last chance yourself. Turn around and ride out. Stubborn fool. Marcus jerked his head. Take him. The man on the porch fired first. His shot went wide as Elias dove sideways, rolling behind a water trough. Return fire cracked from the house. Mara, shooting through a gap in the shutters. Her bullet caught the man in the shoulder and he went down cursing. The other two opened up, bullets tearing through wood and glass. Elias fired twice, methodical and precise. One shot punched through the barnside man's leg, dropping him. The second caught the man heading for the cellar center mass, putting him down for good. Jesus! Dawes wheeled his horse, pulling back. This is murder! This is self-defense, Elias shouted back, chambering another round. You brought armed men onto my property and tried to take children by force. Marcus sat his horse calmly, untouched by the chaos. Kill him, he ordered the remaining gunman, the one Mara had wounded. Kill him and burn the house if you have to. I want those children. The wounded man struggled to reload with one good arm. Elias was drawing a bead when movement exploded from the house. Mara burst through the door, pistol blazing. Her first shot took the wounded man in the chest. Her second and third went wide, but the message was clear. She'd die before she let them take Luke. Mara, get back inside, Elias roared. Too late. Marcus spurred his horse forward, incredibly fast for a man his size. He reached Mara in seconds, leaning down to grab her arm. She twisted, trying to bring the pistol up, but he wrenched it from her grip and hauled her across his saddle. No! Elias's shot missed as Marcus wheeled the horse. Let her go! I have what I came for, Marcus called back, Mara struggling in his grip. The girl's enough. Tell the boy to come to me in 3 days or his sister dies. You hear me, Luke? 3 days. He spurred away, Mara screaming and fighting. Elias got off 2 more shots but couldn't risk hitting her. He watched them disappear over the rise, rage and horror churning in his gut. Dawes was already gone, fled at the first real gunfire. The man with the leg wound was crawling toward a horse, leaving a trail of blood. The other two lay still. Elias wanted to chase Marcus down, but he couldn't leave Luke. The boy would be terrified, and Mara's last act had been protecting her brother. Elias couldn't dishonor that by abandoning him now. He found Luke in the cellar, pressed into the far corner, eyes huge with fear. The boy had heard everything, the gunfire, the screaming, his sister's voice calling his name. She's alive, Elias said, kneeling down. Your uncle took her, but she's alive. He wants to trade you for her. Luke's face crumpled. He opened his mouth, and for a moment Elias thought he might finally speak, but nothing came out except a broken sob. Listen to me. Elias gripped the boy's shoulders. We're going to get her back, but not by giving you up. We're going to do this smart. We're going to get help. He got Luke upstairs, sat him down with blankets and warm milk. The boy stared at nothing, tears tracking silently down his face. Elias wanted to comfort him, but comfort felt like a lie. Mara was in the hands of a murderer, and they had 3 days to save her. He was checking the dead men for identification when he heard horses again. His heart sank. More of Marcus's men, come to finish the job. He grabbed his rifle, positioned himself in the doorway. But the riders that appeared weren't hired guns. It was Mary Carson, sitting straight-backed on a gray mare. Behind her came Samuel Yates from the general store, old Tom Pritchard from the saloon, and 3 more men Elias recognized from town. They were armed, but not threatening. They looked grim and determined. Mary dismounted first. We heard gunfire, came as fast as we could. Did you think the whole town didn't see which way Marcus Hutchins rode? Did you think we wouldn't know what was coming? She looked at the bodies, at the blood soaking into the dirt. Where's Mara? He took her. Elias's voice came out rough. Used her as leverage to get Luke. Damn him! Samuel stepped forward. What do you need? Elias stared at them all, these people who'd ridden out to help despite the danger, despite everything. I need to get her back, and I need to make sure Marcus Hutchins can't hurt anyone else ever again. Then let's talk strategy, Tom said, because you're not doing this alone. They gathered in the house, spreading a hand-drawn map across the table. Samuel had been to the Hutchins ranch before, knew the layout. He sketched it out: main house, bunkhouse, barn, the line of cottonwoods along the creek. He'll keep her in the main house, Samuel said, probably locked in a room upstairs. He'll want to keep her close, keep control. How many men does he have? Elias asked. Usually 6 or 7 working the ranch, plus whatever guns he's hired since this started. Samuel tapped the map. But here's the thing. Most of his ranch hands are just cowboys. They signed on to work cattle, not kidnap children. If we can separate them from the hired killers, we might have a chance. We need the law, Mary said. Real law, not Dawes. Territorial Marshal is in Helena, Tom noted. 3 days ride minimum. We don't have 3 days. Then we make our own law. Mary's eyes were hard. There are 12 of us here. 12 people willing to testify that Marcus Hutchins hired men to attack Elias's ranch, to take children by force. That's enough to convene a citizens' tribunal if we have to. He'll never submit to that, Elias said. Then we make him. Tom checked his rifle. I fought in the war same as you, Elias. I know how to storm a position, and I'll be damned if I let some rich bastard think he can murder his way to more property. Elias looked at each of them in turn, these ordinary people who'd become extraordinary when it mattered. This could get us all killed. Could, Samuel agreed. But sitting home while a child suffers because we were too afraid? That'll kill us slower, kill our souls. They spent the next hour planning. Who would approach from which direction, how they'd get past Marcus's men, what they'd do if it came to gunfire again. Luke sat in the corner through all of it, watching, listening, one hand clutched around Emma's cornhusk doll that he'd found in the room. When the planning was done, when they'd gone over every detail 3 times, Mary approached Luke. She knelt down, met his eyes. Your sister is fierce and brave, she said gently. Just like you. We're going to bring her home. You believe that? Luke stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Good. Because when this is over, when you're both safe, I want you to tell me all about your parents. Will you do that? Will you tell me their story? Something shifted in Luke's face. He reached out and touched Mary's hand just for a second. It wasn't speech, but it was communication. It was trust. Mary smiled, eyes bright with tears. That's a promise, then. They left at dawn, before the sun breached the mountains. 12 riders moving fast and quiet through the high country. Elias kept Luke with him, tucked against his chest in the saddle. The boy had refused to stay behind, and Elias understood. Luke needed to be there when they saved Mara, needed to see his sister safe with his own eyes. The Hutchins ranch sat in a valley where 3 creeks met, prime grazing land that had made his brother prosperous. The house was 2 stories, whitewashed and grand, speaking of money and status. The bunkhouse stood separate, smoke rising from its chimney. Cattle grazed in the distance, unaware of the reckoning coming. They split up as planned. Samuel and Tom took 4 men around the back way, approaching through the creek bed. Mary stayed with the horses, holding the reserve. Elias took the other 3 and Luke straight up the main approach, bold as morning. When they were 100 yards out, a man emerged from the bunkhouse. He stopped, staring at them, then shouted back inside. More men spilled out, grabbing rifles. That's far enough. The foreman, a grizzled man named Carson, stepped forward. State your business. We're here for Mara Hutchins, Elias called back. Marcus took her against her will. We're bringing her home. Girl's with her legal guardian. Ain't none of your concern. Murder is everyone's concern, so is kidnapping children. Carson's face hardened. Those are big words, Boone. You got proof? I've got a witness. A girl who saw Marcus Hutchins kill her father. A boy who lost his voice from the trauma. And I've got 10 men here who watched Marcus's hired guns attack my ranch yesterday. Muttering broke out among the cowboys. They were looking at each other uncertainly now, hands nervous on their rifles. You men signed on to work cattle, Elias continued, raising his voice so they could all hear. Not to help a murderer keep his brother's children prisoner. You really want to die protecting a man like that? He pays good, Carson said, but there was doubt in his voice now. Blood money, paid with property stolen from orphans. Elias gestured to the house. You all know what happened to James Hutchins. Called it an accident, but who's ever heard of a man shooting himself while cleaning his gun? And just after he and Marcus had a falling out over water rights. More muttering. One of the younger cowboys lowered his rifle. Shut up, Carson snapped. Boss is a respected man. You got no right. I've got every right. Because yesterday, Marcus Hutchins ordered his men to kill me and burn my house to get to those children. 3 men died in the attempt. The girl he has now? She was defending her home, defending her brother. And he took her at gunpoint. The front door opened. Marcus appeared, pristine in a pressed suit, Mara beside him. His hand gripped her arm tight enough to leave marks. Her hair was disheveled, a bruise darkening her cheek, but her eyes blazed with defiance. Quite a speech, Boone, Marcus called, but it's all lies. The girl came willingly, once she understood her duty to family. Didn't you, Mara? Go to hell, Mara spat. Marcus's hand tightened, making her wince. Children say the most ungrateful things. After everything I've done for her. Luke made a sound, small and broken. Elias felt the boy trembling against him. Let her go, Marcus. This ends now. Does it? Marcus smiled, pulling Mara closer. I don't see the sheriff. I don't see any legal authority. I see a bunch of vigilantes trespassing on my property. In fact, I'd be well within my rights to shoot you all for threatening me in my own home. Except you're outnumbered, Samuel called, emerging from the creek bed with his group. They had rifles trained on the bunkhouse, on the main house, covering every angle. And these men aren't hired killers. They're decent folk you've pushed too far. Marcus's confidence wavered. His eyes darted between the groups, calculating odds and angles. Carson, get these people off my land. But Carson didn't move. He was looking at Mara's bruised face, at the way Marcus held her. Boss, if what they're saying is true, it's not true. These are lies spread by a disturbed child. Then prove it, Mary said, riding forward. Submit to a citizen's tribunal. Let witnesses testify. If you're innocent, you have nothing to fear. I don't have to prove anything to you people. Actually, you do, Tom said. Because we're not leaving without that girl. And if you try to stop us, if you try to hurt her, every person here will testify that you're a kidnapper and a murderer. That story will spread from here to Helena and back. Your reputation will be destroyed. Marcus's face flushed red. His grip on Mara tightened until she gasped. You think you can threaten me? I own this valley. I own the sheriff. I own... You don't own us, Elias said quietly. And you don't own those children. Their father's land was theirs by right. You killed him to take it, and we're not going to let you finish what you started. For a moment, everything hung in balance. Marcus could shoot Mara, could order his men to fight. It would be a bloodbath. But Elias could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The cost versus the gain, the risk versus the reward. Finally, Carson spoke. Boss, I ain't dying for this. If she's here against her will, that ain't right. None of us signed on for that. Other cowboys nodded, lowering their rifles. Marcus's face went from red to white. He was losing control, and he knew it. Damn you, he hissed. Damn you all! He shoved Mara forward, hard. She stumbled down the porch steps, nearly falling. Elias was there in an instant, catching her, pulling her close. Luke squirmed free and threw himself at his sister, wrapping his arms around her waist. It's okay, Mara sobbed, holding Luke tight. It's okay, little bird. We're safe now. This isn't over, Marcus snarled from the porch. I have lawyers. I have connections. You'll all regret this. No, Elias said, looking up at him. You'll regret it, because we're going to Helena. We're going to the territorial marshal. We're going to tell him everything, the murder, the kidnapping, all of it. And we have witnesses. Enough to make sure you answer for what you've done. Marcus's face twisted with rage and something else. Fear. Real fear, maybe for the first time in his life. Get off my property, he said finally. Gladly. Elias helped Mara onto a horse, Luke scrambling up behind her. But we'll be back, with the law. The real law. They rode out together, 12 riders and 2 children, leaving Marcus Hutchins standing on his stolen porch, his empire crumbling around him. The sun was high by the time they reached Elias's ranch. Mara slid from the saddle and just stood for a moment, looking at the house like she couldn't quite believe they'd made it. Luke pressed against her side, still silent, still traumatized, but alive. Mary dismounted, approached them. "You're safe now, both of you. We'll make sure of it." "Why?" Mara's voice broke. "Why did you all risk so much for us?" "Because it was right," Mary said simply. "Because you're children who deserve protection. Because sometimes the law fails and ordinary people have to stand up." She looked at Elias. "And because Elias Boone reminded us what courage looks like." Elias shook his head. "Wasn't courage. Was just stubbornness. Call it what you want. But you didn't turn away when these children needed help. You didn't close your door." Samuel clapped him on the shoulder. "That counts for something." They stayed until evening, helping clean up the damage from yesterday's attack, boarding up broken windows, burying the dead. When they finally rode out, they left with a promise. Tomorrow, they'd start the ride to Helena together. They'd bring the territorial marshal back to deal with Marcus Hutchins once and for all. Inside the house, Mara heated water for tea while Luke sat at the table, watching her like she might disappear if he looked away. Elias joined them, exhaustion settling into his bones. "You scared me," he said to Mara, "running out like that. I wasn't going to let them kill you. You could have been killed yourself. But I wasn't. We weren't." She poured tea with shaking hands. "Because of you. Because you didn't give up." "Because we didn't give up," Elias corrected. "This was all of us." They sat in silence for a while, drinking tea, the day's terror slowly receding. Luke's eyes drooped. Mara carried him to bed, came back looking worn through. "What happens now?" she asked. "After Helena? After they arrest Marcus? There'll be a trial. You'll have to testify." "And then?" Elias looked at her, this girl who'd been forced to grow up too fast, to be too brave, too strong. "Then you get to be a child again. You and Luke both. Get to go to school, make friends, do normal things." "Where?" The question hung between them. Where would they go? To an orphanage? To distant relatives who might not exist? Into the system that had already failed them once? "Here," Elias heard himself say. "You stay here, if you want. If that would be all right with you." Mara's eyes filled with tears. "You'd do that? Keep us?" "Keep you, raise you, make sure you grow up safe and happy, whatever it takes." He cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the emotion in his own voice. "Been alone a long time, but these past weeks, having you both here, house feels like a home again. Like maybe there's still life worth living." "We'd like that," Mara whispered. "We'd like that very much." Outside, stars emerged over the Montana mountains, bright and infinite. The ranch settled into quiet, 3 people under one roof, no longer strangers, not quite family yet, but something in between, something precious and hard-won. Tomorrow they'd ride for Helena. Tomorrow they'd start the fight for justice. But tonight they were simply safe, together, and alive. And sometimes that was enough. The ride to Helena took 6 days through mountain passes still dusted with early snow. They traveled as a group, Elias and the children, Mary Carson, Samuel Yates, Tom Pritchard, and 4 others who'd volunteered to see this through to the end. Each night they camped under stars that seemed close enough to touch, and each morning they rose with the sun and pushed forward, driven by purpose that felt righteous and necessary. Luke rode with Elias, small body tucked against his chest, watching the world pass with those 2 solemn eyes. Mara rode beside them on the gray mare Mary had loaned her, sitting straighter each day, the bruise on her cheek fading from purple to yellow-green. She talked more now, sharing memories of her parents, small things, precious things. Her father's laugh, her mother's singing, the way their house had smelled like cinnamon on Sundays. "Mama wanted to open a school," Mara said on the 3rd day, as they followed a creek through aspen groves gone golden. Said every child deserved to read, to know arithmetic, to understand the world. Papa would tease her, say she wanted to civilize the whole territory single-handed. Her smile was sad but genuine. She'd just laugh and say somebody had to. "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Mary said from behind them. She was. They both were. That's why Marcus, Mara's voice caught. That's why he couldn't let them stand in his way. They would have fought him, would have exposed what he was. Elias reached over, squeezed her shoulder. You're fighting him now, finishing what they started. What if it's not enough? What if the marshal doesn't believe us either? Then we make him believe. Tom urged his horse forward. We've got witnesses, we've got testimony, and we've got the fact that Marcus sent hired killers to attack a ranch and kidnap children. That's not nothing. It's everything, Samuel added. And more people are listening now. Word spreading. By the time we reach Helena, half the territory will know Marcus Hutchins' name and what he's accused of. They rode through towns and trading posts, and at each stop, the story grew. People who'd heard whispers about the Hutchins case, about two orphan children fighting for their inheritance. Some were sympathetic, others skeptical, but all of them listened. All of them remembered. On the fourth night, camped in a meadow where elk grazed in the distance, Luke came and sat beside Elias at the fire. The boy had been increasingly restless, following his sister everywhere, watching the tree line like he expected Marcus to emerge from the shadows with a gun. Can't sleep? Elias asked quietly. Luke shook his head. Worried about what's coming? A nod this time, small and uncertain. Elias pulled the boy closer, let him lean against his side. I'm scared too, if that helps. Scared we'll get to Helena and the law won't care. Scared Marcus will find some way to twist the truth. Scared I won't be able to protect you and your sister the way you deserve. Luke looked up at him, eyes reflecting firelight. But here's what I know, Elias continued. Whatever happens, we face it together, not alone anymore. You got your sister, she's got you, and you both got me. That's not nothing. That's what family means, standing together when things get hard. The boy's throat worked like he was trying to speak. His mouth opened, shaped around a word, but nothing came out. Frustration crossed his face. It's all right, Elias said gently. Your voice will come back when it's ready. And until then, we'll listen to what you're saying in other ways. Luke nodded slowly, then did something unexpected. He reached out and took Elias's hand, held it tight like an anchor in stormy water. They sat like that until the fire burned low and stars wheeled overhead, and Elias felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen since Sarah and Emma died, thawing at last in the warmth of being needed again. Helena emerged from the wilderness on the sixth day, a sprawling town built on silver money and territorial ambition. The streets teemed with miners, merchants, gamblers, and opportunists drawn by the promise of wealth. The marshal's office sat on the main thoroughfare, a solid building that spoke of authority and permanence. Elias dismounted outside, helped Luke down. Mara joined them, smoothing her dress with nervous hands. Mary and the others gathered close, a show of solidarity that felt necessary and profound. Ready? Elias asked Mara. She lifted her chin, that stubborn courage surfacing again. Ready. Inside, a clerk looked up from his desk, took in their travel-worn group with raised eyebrows. Help you folks? Need to see the territorial marshal, Elias said. It's urgent. Marshal's a busy man. You got an appointment? We've got a murder case. That urgent enough for you? The clerk's expression shifted. He stood, disappeared through a back door. Moments later, he returned with a man in his 50s, weathered and competent-looking, with a badge pinned to his vest and eyes that missed nothing. I'm Marshal William Grant. You're here about a murder? Marcus Hutchins murdered his brother James to steal his land and inheritance. This is James's daughter Mara, and that's his son Luke. They witnessed it, and Hutchins has been trying to silence them ever since. Grant's gaze moved over them, assessing. That's a serious charge. You got evidence? We've got Mara's testimony. We've got the fact that Hutchins hired men to attack my ranch when I gave the children shelter. 3 men died in that attack. We've got witnesses who'll testify to kidnapping, to threats, to everything Hutchins has done. And we've got questions about the original sheriff's investigation. Mary stepped forward. Questions about why a lawman would rule a death accidental without interviewing the children who were in the house that night. Grant was quiet for a moment, studying each face. Then he gestured toward his office. Come on back. Let's hear the whole story. They spent 3 hours in that office, laying out everything. Mara spoke first, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands, describing that terrible night, the shouting, the gunshots, hiding in the root cellar while her parents' bodies cooled in the house above. Luke sat beside her, holding her hand, silent witness to the truth. Then Elias described taking them in, the attack on his ranch, Marcus taking Mara at gunpoint. Samuel and Tom corroborated everything, adding details about how Marcus had operated in the territory, rumors of coercion and manipulation that no one had been brave enough to voice before. Grant took notes, asked pointed questions, his expression growing grimmer with each revelation. When they finished, he set down his pen and looked at Mara. "Miss Hutchins, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before answering. Are you absolutely certain about what you heard that night? Because once we move forward with this, there's no going back. You'll have to testify in court, face your uncle, repeat this story in front of strangers who'll try to tear it apart." Mara met his eyes without flinching. "I'm certain. I know what I heard. I know my father didn't kill himself, and I know my uncle wanted us dead so we couldn't inherit." "All right then." Grant stood, moved to the window overlooking the street. "This won't be easy. Marcus Hutchins has money and influence. He'll hire the best lawyers in the territory. He'll call your credibility into question, say you're a traumatized child with a grudge." "But you believe her?" Elias asked. "I believe something happened that night that warrants investigation. And I believe the original sheriff failed in his duty." Grant turned back to them. "I'll ride down to Bent Creek myself. I'll examine the evidence, interview witnesses, and if what you're saying holds up, I'll arrest Marcus Hutchins for murder." Relief flooded through the room like released breath. Mara's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet. Getting an arrest is one thing. Getting a conviction is another." Grant looked at Elias. "These children will need a safe place while this plays out, somewhere Hutchins can't get to them." "They have one. My ranch. And I've got 10 people who'll help me defend it if necessary." "Good. Because Hutchins won't go quietly. Men like him never do." Grant moved toward the door. "Give me 2 days to organize a detail. Then we ride." They found lodging at a boarding house on the edge of town. 2 rooms with clean beds and a landlady who clucked sympathetically over Luke's silence and Mara's bruises. That night, after the children were asleep, Elias sat with Mary and Samuel in the common room, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "You think Grant will follow through?" Samuel asked. "I think he's an honest man trying to do his job, but honest men can be pressured, bought, or scared off." Elias stared into his cup. "We need to be ready for this to go wrong." "It won't," Mary said firmly. "Not this time. There are too many witnesses now, too many people watching. Marcus can't make this disappear the way he did the first investigation." "Hope you're right." "I am. And when this is over, when Marcus is in prison where he belongs, those children will need stability. They'll need a real home, a real family." She looked at Elias meaningfully. "You prepared for that? For the long haul?" Elias thought about Emma's room, no longer empty, about Luke's small hand in his, about Mara's fierce courage that reminded him of Sarah every single day. "I'm prepared. More prepared than I've been for anything in years." "Good. Because they need you, maybe as much as you need them." The word settled into truth in his chest. He did need them. Needed the way they'd brought his house back to life, filled the silence with purpose and meaning. Needed the reminder that loss didn't have to be the end of everything. 2 days later, Marshal Grant assembled his detail. 6 deputies, all hard-eyed men who looked competent and incorruptible. They rode out at dawn, back through the mountains toward Bent Creek, toward confrontation and justice that felt overdue. The journey back felt different, faster, sharper, weighted with anticipation. They pushed hard, covering in 4 days what had taken 6 on the way out. When Bent Creek appeared in the distance, Elias felt tension coil in his shoulders. This was where it would end, one way or another. Grant led them straight to the Hutchins ranch. This time, there was no negotiation, no standoff. The marshal rode up to that whitewashed house with authority that couldn't be ignored, dismounted with purpose, knocked on the door like judgment itself. Marcus Hutchins opened it, face composed but eyes calculating. "Marshal Grant, what brings you out here?" "Marcus Hutchins, you're under arrest for the murder of your brother James Hutchins and the attempted murder of his children, Mara and Luke Hutchins." The color drained from Marcus's face. That's absurd. I've done no such thing. You can tell it to a judge. Turn around, hands behind your back. This is a mistake. I have rights. I demand to speak with my lawyer. You'll get your lawyer after you're in custody. Grant nodded to his deputies. They moved forward, efficient and professional, clasping irons around Marcus's wrists. This is persecution. Marcus's composure cracked, voice rising. You're arresting a respected member of this community based on the lies of a disturbed child. I'm arresting a man who hired gunmen to attack a ranch and kidnap children. Everything else we'll sort out in court. Grant gestured to his men. Take him to the jail in Bent Creek. I'll be along shortly. They dragged Marcus away, still protesting, still threatening lawyers and lawsuits and ruin for everyone involved. But his voice faded, swallowed by distance and justice, and Elias felt something like vindication settle in his bones. Grant turned to Carson, the foreman who stood watching from the bunkhouse. You worked for both brothers. Tell me true. Did James Hutchins strike you as the kind of man who'd accidentally shoot himself cleaning his gun? Carson shifted uncomfortably. No, sir. James was careful, knew his way around firearms, and he and Marcus had been fighting for months over water rights, over property boundaries. Got real heated toward the end. You tell the sheriff that when he investigated? Tried to. He said I was speculating, said there was no evidence of foul play. Well, there is now. Grant looked at the house, at the land spreading rich and prosperous in all directions. This property belongs to James Hutchins' children by right of inheritance. Nobody touches it until the court rules. That clear? Yes, sir. They rode back to Bent Creek in silence, watching Marcus ahead of them, bound and defeated, the architect of his own destruction. When they reached the jail, a crowd had gathered, curious townspeople drawn by news that traveled fast in small places. Sheriff Dawes stood outside his office, face ashen. Marshal, there's been some mistake. The only mistake was yours, Sheriff, ruling a death accidental without proper investigation, failing to interview key witnesses. Looking the other way while a murderer consolidated power. Grant's voice carried, meant for the crowd as much as Dawes. We'll be discussing your conduct in detail, but first, let's get this prisoner secured. They locked Marcus in a cell that smelled of rust and desperation. He gripped the bars, face twisted with rage and something approaching fear. You'll regret this, all of you. I'll destroy you. I'll save it for the judge. Grant turned away, dismissing him. Outside, Elias found Mara and Luke standing with Mary, watching the jail like they couldn't quite believe it was real. Mara's face was pale but composed. Luke pressed against her side, one hand gripping her dress. Is it over? Mara asked. Is he really arrested? He's arrested, Grant confirmed. Trial will be in 3 weeks. You'll both need to testify. Think you can do that? I can do it. Mara's voice didn't waver. I can tell them everything. What about the boy? Will he speak? Luke stiffened, face crumpling with distress. Elias moved closer, put a hand on his shoulder. Luke will testify in his own way, through Mara, through me, through what happened to him. A child doesn't lose his voice from nothing, Marshal. That trauma speaks louder than words. Grant nodded slowly. Fair enough. Get some rest, all of you. It's been a long road, and there's still a ways to go. They returned to Elias's ranch as sunset painted the mountains copper and gold. The house welcomed them back, familiar and safe. And for the first time since this whole ordeal began, Elias felt like they could breathe, could rest, could start thinking about what came after. That night, Mara helped him make dinner while Luke set the table with careful concentration. They moved around each other with the ease of practice, comfortable in their roles and routines. When they sat down to eat, Elias looked at their faces in the lamplight and felt gratitude so profound it ached. What happens to the ranch? Mara asked quietly. Our parents' ranch, I mean, after the trial. If Marcus is convicted, it reverts to you and Luke. It's your inheritance, bought with your father's work and your mother's dreams. I don't know if I can go back there. Not after everything. You don't have to decide now. The land isn't going anywhere. She picked at her food, thoughtful. Maybe we could lease it to someone. Keep it in the family, but let someone else work it. And we could stay here, if that's still all right. More than all right. Elias cleared his throat against sudden emotion. This is your home now, for as long as you want it. Luke looked up from his plate, eyes bright. He opened his mouth, and Elias saw him struggling again, fighting against the silence that had claimed him. The boy's face reddened with effort, throat working around sounds that wouldn't come. Easy, Mara said, touching his arm. You don't have to... Home. The word came out broken and hoarse, barely more than a whisper, but it was there, real, spoken. They all froze. Elias felt his heart stutter in his chest. Mara's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling over. Luke, she breathed, did you just... Home, Luke said again, clearer this time. His eyes were huge, disbelieving, like he'd surprised himself. Then suddenly, he was crying, great heaving sobs that shook his small frame. Mama, Papa, gone. All gone. Mara pulled him into her arms, both of them weeping now, months of grief and terror finally breaking through the dam of his silence. Elias sat across from them, his own vision blurring, watching two children who'd lost everything begin the long process of healing. They're gone, Mara whispered into her brother's hair. But we're still here. We're still together. And we're safe now. We're finally safe. They cried until there were no more tears, until exhaustion claimed them. Elias helped them both to bed, tucked them in like his own father had once done for him, whispering reassurances into the darkness. In his own room later, lying awake and listening to the house settle around him, Elias thought about the family he'd lost and the one he was building from the ashes. Thought about how grief could hollow you out or make space for new love to grow. How the worst moments could lead to the most profound connections. He'd thought his life was over when Sarah and Emma died. Thought there was nothing left but waiting for his own end. But two scared children had knocked on his door and reminded him what it meant to fight for something. What it felt like to be needed, to matter, to stand between the darkness and the people you loved. The trial came 3 weeks later in the territorial courthouse, a solemn building that smelled of wood polish and tension. The courtroom filled with spectators, townspeople, ranchers, curiosity seekers drawn by scandal and the promise of justice. Marcus sat at the defendant's table with his expensive lawyers, face carefully neutral, but Elias could see fear flickering beneath the surface. Mara took the stand first, wearing a dress Mary had sewn for her, looking small but unbreakable. She told her story clearly, methodically, describing every detail of that terrible night. The defense attorney tried to shake her, suggesting she'd been confused, traumatized, mistaken about what she'd heard. I was not confused, Mara said, voice ringing through the courtroom. I heard my father say, "You'll get nothing from me, Marcus." Then I heard gunshots. Then I heard my uncle telling the sheriff it was an accident before the sun even rose. I know what I heard. I know what happened. Luke testified next, or rather Elias testified about Luke's testimony. Described how the boy had lost his voice from trauma, how he'd finally spoken again only after Marcus was arrested. The defense objected, calling it hearsay, but the judge allowed it, noting that trauma itself was evidence of something terrible. Samuel, Tom, Mary, and the others testified about the attack on Elias's ranch, about Marcus's men, about the kidnapping. The evidence piled up, piece by damning piece, until even Marcus's lawyers looked uncomfortable. The defense tried to paint Marcus as a grieving brother, a concerned uncle, a victim of conspiracy. But their case crumbled under the weight of testimony and truth. On the final day, after closing arguments, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. We find the defendant, Marcus Hutchins, guilty of murder in the first degree. The courtroom erupted. Marcus's face went white, then red, mouth opening in protest. But the judge's gavel fell like thunder, and it was done. Justice, delayed but not denied. Outside in the afternoon sun, Mara stood with Luke's hand in hers, looking dazed and relieved and exhausted all at once. People congratulated them, praised their courage, offered sympathies for their loss. Marshal Grant approached, tipped his hat. You did well in there, Miss Hutchins, both of you. Your parents would be proud. Thank you, Marshal, for believing us, for doing what was right. Just doing my job. But I'll admit you made it easier by being so damn brave. He looked at Elias. Take care of these children, Boone. They've been through hell. I will, for as long as they'll have me. They rode home as winter's first snow began to fall, soft flakes drifting down like blessings. The ranch appeared through the white, smoke rising from the chimney, lights glowing warm in the windows. It looked like what it was: a home, a refuge, a place where broken people could start to heal. Inside, they shed their coats and gathered around the fire. Luke spoke more now, his voice still hesitant but growing stronger each day. He talked about his parents sometimes, sharing memories that Mara had thought lost forever. They grieved together, the three of them, for what was gone and would never return. But they also began to build something new. Mara learned to cook the way Sarah once had, experimenting with recipes and laughing at her failures. Luke followed Elias around the ranch, learning to mend fences and gentle horses and read the weather in the clouds. They created traditions: Sunday breakfasts, evening stories, quiet moments of being together. The land that had belonged to James and his wife went to Mara and Luke legally, officially, as it should have from the start. They leased it to a young couple starting out, keeping ownership but letting others work it while they figured out their own futures. The income provided for their education, for their needs, for the life their parents had wanted them to have. Marcus Hutchins was sentenced to hang for murder, but the sentence was commuted to life imprisonment after appeals and legal maneuvering. He would die in prison years later, unrepentant and bitter, a cautionary tale about greed and the wages of sin. Sheriff Dawes resigned in disgrace, replaced by a man who took his oath seriously and couldn't be bought. The territory changed slowly as word spread about what had happened, about children who'd fought for justice and won, about ordinary people who'd stood against corruption and refused to back down. And on Elias Boone's ranch, 2 orphans learned to laugh again, learned to trust again, learned that family wasn't just blood but choice, commitment, the daily decision to show up and care and protect what mattered most. They had survived the darkness. They had found each other. And in finding each other, they had found a way forward, scarred but unbroken, grieving but grateful, ready at last to live. Winter settled over the Montana mountains like a promise kept, transforming the world into something clean and new. Snow covered the scars left by violence, blanketed the graves where hired guns lay buried, softened the harsh edges of memory until even the worst moments began to lose their teeth. Elias stood on his porch 3 months after the trial, coffee steaming in the cold morning air, watching Luke build a snowman in the yard. The boy worked with intense concentration, rolling snow into spheres, carefully placing stones for eyes and mouth. His voice drifted back to the house, talking to himself, or maybe to the memory of parents who would have loved to see him play like this. "You'll freeze out there," Mara called from the doorway, wrapped in one of Sarah's old shawls. She'd grown in these months, not just taller but steadier, carrying herself with a confidence that came from surviving the unsurvivable. "Come eat breakfast before it gets cold." "In a minute," Luke called back, voice still rough from disuse but stronger every day. "I'm almost done." Elias smiled. Those words, simple and ordinary, meant everything. A child who'd lost his voice to trauma, speaking without fear. A child who'd watched his parents die, playing in the snow like darkness had never touched him. It wasn't forgetting. Elias knew they'd never forget. But it was healing, and that was enough. Inside, the kitchen smelled of bacon and fresh bread, of coffee and cinnamon. Mara had taken over most of the cooking, insisting that Elias's bachelor approach to food was barely adequate for survival. She moved around the space with Sarah's old apron tied at her waist, flipping eggs with the same efficient grace her mother must have possessed. "Mary's coming by this afternoon," she said, sliding eggs onto plates. "She wants to talk about school. Says the territorial government approved funding for a teacher, and they're looking for students." "You want to go?" Elias asked, though he already knew the answer. Mara had been teaching herself from books all winter, hungry for learning the way some people hungered for food. "I do, but I'm worried about Luke. He's still so shy around strangers." "Luke's tougher than he looks, and being around other children might help him remember how to be a child." She nodded thoughtfully, dishing out bacon. "What about you? Will you be all right here alone during the day?" The question caught him off guard, touched something tender. "Been alone for 4 years before you two showed up. Think I can manage a few hours." "That's not what I meant." She sat down across from him, eyes serious. "I mean, will you be lonely? We could stay home, help with the ranch." "No." Elias's voice came out sharper than intended. He softened it. "No, you'll go to school. You'll learn everything you can. That's what your parents would have wanted. That's what I want. Luke burst through the door, cheeks red from cold, tracking snow across the floor. Come see. I made him tall as Papa was. They followed him outside, and Elias felt his throat tighten at the sight. The snowman stood nearly 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, with a stick arm spread wide like he was welcoming someone home. Luke had fashioned a hat from bark and placed it at a jaunty angle. It's perfect, Mara whispered, tears in her eyes. He looks just right. Papa would like it, Luke said confidently. Then his face fell slightly. I think he would. It's getting hard to remember his face exactly. Elias crouched down beside the boy. That's all right. Memory fades, but love doesn't. You don't have to remember every detail to know your father loved you, to know he'd be proud of the man you're becoming. You think so? I know so. They ate breakfast together. The three of them crowded around the table, talking about small things, the horses, the weather, whether they'd get more snow before spring. Ordinary conversation that felt extraordinary because they were alive to have it, safe enough to care about tomorrow. After breakfast, Elias went out to check on the cattle while Mara and Luke cleaned up. He found them later in the barn, Luke showing his sister how to braid rope the way Elias had taught him. They worked side by side, heads bent together, and Elias was struck by how much they looked like siblings should, comfortable, connected, complete. Mary Carson arrived in early afternoon, driving a small wagon through snow that was already starting to melt in the winter sun. She climbed down with her usual brisk efficiency, carrying a basket covered with a cloth. Brought you some preserves and bread, she announced, handing the basket to Mara. And news from town. They gathered in the parlor, the room Elias had avoided for years, but that Mara had slowly reclaimed, dusting and arranging until it felt lived in again. Mary settled into the chair that had been Sarah's favorite, and Elias noted how right it looked, how his late wife would have approved. The school situation first, Mary began. We have a teacher starting next month, a young woman from back east with proper credentials. She'll be holding classes in the church building until we can raise funds for a schoolhouse. I've already enrolled 8 children, and I'd like to add Luke and Mara to the roster. We'd like that, Mara said quickly, glancing at Luke. Both of us would. Luke nodded, though he looked nervous. Good. Classes will be Monday through Friday, 9 to 3. You'll study reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and geography. Miss Peterson is also trained in music, if anyone's interested. Mama played piano, Luke said quietly. She was teaching me before. Then we'll make sure you continue. Mary's voice was gentle but firm. Your parents wanted you educated. We'll honor that. What's the other news? Elias asked, sensing there was more. Mary's expression shifted, became more cautious. There's been talk in town about you and the children, about the arrangement here. Elias felt tension coil in his shoulders. What kind of talk? Nothing malicious mostly, but some people are asking questions about propriety, about whether it's appropriate for a widowed man to be raising 2 children alone, particularly a teenage girl. There's been some suggestion that the children should be with a proper family, or that you should remarry to provide a mother figure. Anger flared hot in Elias's chest. These children have been through hell. They lost their parents, were hunted by their own uncle, nearly died more times than I can count. And now people are worried about propriety? I'm not saying I agree with them, Mary said calmly. I'm saying you need to be aware. Small towns have small minds sometimes, and gossip can be damaging. Mara stood abruptly, face flushed. We're not going anywhere. This is our home. Elias is our family. If people have a problem with that, peace. Mary held up a hand. I'm on your side, child. I'm just preparing you for what's coming, because there will be questions, possibly even legal challenges. You need to be ready. Elias forced himself to think past his anger, to see the situation clearly. Mary was right. The arrangement they'd fallen into so naturally, this makeshift family built from grief and necessity, it didn't fit the world's expectations. That made it vulnerable. What do you suggest? He asked. Make it official, legal. File for formal guardianship through the territorial court. Get it documented that you're their legal guardian, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. That way no one can question it. No one can try to take them away. Would that work? Mara asked, hope and fear mixing in her voice. It should, especially given that you have property in your name, income from the leased land, and Elias has proven himself capable of providing for you. Add in testimony from respected community members, myself, Samuel, Tom, the marshal, and no judge would deny the petition. Then we do it. Elias looked at Mara and Luke. If that's what you want. If you want to make this official. We want to stay, Mara said firmly. Luke nodded agreement. Then it's settled. Mary pulled papers from her bag. I took the liberty of drawing up the preliminary documents. You'll need to file in Helena, but this will get the process started. They spent the next hour going over paperwork, signing forms that would transform their informal arrangement into something legally binding. When it was done, Mary gathered her things, preparing to leave. One more thing, she said at the door. There's a community gathering next month, a dance and social to raise funds for the school. You should all come. Let people see you as a family, see how well the children are doing. It'll help quiet the gossips. After she left, Elias stood at the window, watching her wagon disappear down the snowy road. Behind him, he heard Mara and Luke murmuring together, their voices a comfort he'd grown to depend on. You all right? Mara appeared at his elbow. Just thinking about how much things have changed. Do you regret it, taking us in? He turned to look at her, this fierce girl who'd walked up his road and changed everything. Not for a second. You two, you brought my house back to life, brought me back to life. Whatever paperwork we have to file, whatever gossips we have to face, it's worth it. She smiled, and he saw her mother in the curve of her mouth, her father in the steadiness of her gaze. Good, because we're not going anywhere. The weeks passed in a rhythm of work and routine. Elias taught Luke how to ride properly, how to mend tack, how to gentle a spooked horse with patience and quiet confidence. Mara threw herself into preparing for school, reading everything she could find, practicing her penmanship until the letters flowed smooth and sure. In the evenings, they sat together by the fire. Sometimes Mara would read aloud from books Elias had forgotten he owned. Sometimes Luke would practice his words, telling stories that grew longer and more confident. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, three people who'd found each other against all odds, grateful for the peace they'd fought so hard to claim. One night, after Luke had gone to bed, Mara stayed up with Elias, mending a shirt in the lamplight. She worked in silence for a while, then spoke without looking up. I've been thinking about my parents' land, the ranch. What about it? The couple we're leasing to, the Johnsons, they're doing well with it, making improvements, building it up. But it's still ours, mine and Luke's, our inheritance. It is. When I'm older, when Luke's grown, maybe we could go back there. Not to live, necessarily, but to run it properly. Keep it in the family the way Mama and Papa wanted. She looked up then, eyes searching his face. Would that be all right, if we kept ties to both places? More than all right. That land is part of your history, your family's legacy. You should hold on to it, nurture it, maybe pass it down to your own children someday. My own children. She smiled at the thought. That seems so far away. Sometimes I feel ancient, like I've lived 100 years. Other times I feel like I'm still that scared girl hiding in the root cellar. You're both. You're everything you've been and everything you're becoming. That's what surviving does. It layers you, makes you complex. Is that what happened to you after the war, after your family died? Elias was quiet for a moment, considering. I suppose it did. War made me harder, colder. Losing Sarah and Emma almost finished what the war started. I was just going through motions, waiting to die without actually doing it. He looked at her. Then you and Luke showed up and reminded me that life wasn't finished with me yet. We're both lucky then, that we found each other. Lucky, Elias agreed, or maybe just stubborn enough to survive until we did. The guardianship papers were filed in February, processed through the territorial court with surprising efficiency. Marshal Grant's endorsement helped, as did testimonies from Mary, Samuel, and half a dozen other citizens willing to vouch for Elias's character and the children's well-being. By early March, it was official. Elias Boone was the legal guardian of Mara and Luke Hutchins, with all rights and responsibilities thereof. The community dance came on the first warm evening of spring, when snow had retreated to the highest peaks and the valley was greening with new life. The church hall was strung with lanterns and filled with people dressed in their finest, ready to celebrate the season and support the new school. Elias had initially resisted attending, uncomfortable with crowds and socializing after years of isolation. But Mara had given him that look, the one that was pure Sarah, equal parts pleading and determination, and he'd caved. They dressed in their best clothes, Luke in a shirt Mara had sewn, Mara in a dress Mary had helped her make, and Elias in the suit he hadn't worn since Sarah's funeral. When they entered the hall, conversations faltered. Heads turned. Elias felt the weight of scrutiny, saw speculation in some eyes, approval in others. Then Mary was there, sweeping forward with a smile that dared anyone to object. "The Boone family," she announced, loud enough to carry. "How wonderful you could make it." The Boone family. The words hung in the air, a declaration and a challenge. Elias saw the moment people decided to accept it, saw skepticism shift to welcome. Samuel approached with his wife, Tom with his grown sons, and soon they were surrounded by well-wishers and friends. Luke disappeared almost immediately, drawn to a group of children playing near the refreshment table. Elias watched him go with a mixture of pride and anxiety. This was the first time the boy had voluntarily approached other children since before his parents died. "He'll be fine," Mara said, reading his expression. "He's ready." The evening passed in a blur of conversation and music. A fiddle player struck up a reel, and couples took to the floor. Elias found himself dancing with Mary, then with Samuel's wife, then with Mara, who laughed when he stepped on her toes. "You're terrible at this," she teased. "Haven't danced since your age. Give me a break." Mama loved to dance. She and Papa would dance in the kitchen sometimes when they thought Luke and I were asleep. We'd watch from the stairs, and they looked so happy together. "That's a good memory. Hold on to it." "I will. But I'm making new ones, too, like dancing with my cantankerous guardian who's forgotten how feet work." He laughed, and it felt good, felt right. They spun past Luke, who was deep in conversation with a boy his age, animated and engaged in a way Elias hadn't seen since the early days. Near the refreshment table, a group of women watched them with smiles that looked genuine. The gossip, it seemed, was dying a natural death. As the evening wound down, as people began gathering children and preparing to leave, the new school teacher approached. Miss Peterson was young, maybe 25, with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Boone? I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Evelyn Peterson, the new teacher. Heard good things about you. I wanted to discuss Mara and Luke. I understand they've been through significant trauma, and I want to make sure I'm prepared to support them properly in the classroom." Elias liked her immediately. They're resilient, stronger than they have any right to be. But Luke still has nightmares sometimes, and Mara carries guilt she shouldn't have to carry. They need patience, understanding. They'll have it, and I'll need your help making sure they're challenged appropriately. Mara's reading level is remarkably advanced for her age. She's been teaching herself all winter, girls hungry for knowledge. Then we'll make sure she gets it. Miss Peterson smiled. "I think they're going to do wonderfully, Mr. Boone. You should be proud of them." "I am," he said simply, and meant it with every fiber of his being. They rode home under stars that seemed close enough to touch, Luke half asleep against Elias's chest, Mara humming a tune from the dance. The ranch appeared in the darkness like a beacon, windows glowing, smoke rising from the chimney where Elias had banked coals before leaving. Inside, they shed their fancy clothes and got ready for bed. Luke was asleep almost before his head hit the pillow, exhausted from socializing. Mara lingered in the kitchen, making tea they probably didn't need, but that felt comforting anyway. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for everything. For taking us in, for protecting us, for making this official, for giving us a home when we had nothing. You don't need to thank me. I do, though, because you saved our lives. Not just from Marcus, but from becoming bitter, broken people. You showed us that we could still have family, still have love, still have a future worth living for." Elias felt emotion clog his throat. "You saved me too, brought me back from a place I wasn't sure I could return from. We saved each other." She nodded, eyes bright with tears, then kissed his cheek and disappeared down the hall to bed. Elias sat alone in his kitchen, listening to his house breathe around him, to the small sounds of children sleeping safe and sound, and felt contentment he hadn't experienced in years. School started the following week. Elias drove them into town that first morning, watched them disappear into the church building with a mix of pride and anxiety. The day felt impossibly long without them, the house too quiet, his routine disrupted. But when he picked them up that afternoon, both were bubbling with excitement. "Miss Peterson knows everything," Mara gushed. "She's been to Boston, to New York. She's read books I've never even heard of." "I made a friend," Luke added shyly. "His name is Thomas. He has a dog." They chattered all the way home, and Elias let their voices wash over him, a reminder of normalcy reclaimed. This was what healing looked like. Children excited about school, making friends, thinking about tomorrow without fear. The months unfolded in patterns of growth and change. Spring brought calving season, and Luke proved surprisingly good with the newborns, patient and gentle. Summer brought the hard work of haying, and Mara surprised them all by insisting on helping, working alongside them in the fields until her hands were blistered and her face sunburned. They visited the Johnson family on the leased ranch, saw how the land was thriving under their care. The Johnsons were kind people, and they showed Mara and Luke everything, the improvements they'd made, the plans they had for next year, the ways they were honoring the property. "Your parents would be proud," Mrs. Johnson told them. "This was their dream, making this land productive and prosperous. We're just continuing what they started." Mara walked the property with a strange expression, part grief, part peace. "It still hurts to be here," she admitted to Elias later. "But it's good hurt. Like remembering something precious even though it makes you sad." "That's called bittersweet. Life's full of it. I'm learning that." They celebrated Luke's 9th birthday in August with a party that brought neighbors from miles around. The boy blew out candles on a cake Mara had baked, made wishes Elias hoped would come true. Later, when everyone had gone home, Luke climbed into Elias's lap, something he was really getting too big for, and said something that made Elias's heart clench. "Can I call you Pa? Not instead of my father, but along with him?" Elias had to clear his throat twice before he could answer. "I'd be honored." "What about me?" Mara asked from the doorway. "What should I call you?" "Whatever feels right. I'm not trying to replace your father." She considered, then smiled. "How about Elias?" "That feels right. You're not trying to be Papa. You're just trying to be you. And that's enough." The first anniversary of the night they'd arrived passed quietly. None of them mentioned it, but all of them felt it, the weight of how far they'd come, how much they'd survived. Elias stood on his porch that evening, watching the sun set over mountains that had witnessed their transformation, and thought about the man he'd been a year ago. That man had been dead inside, just waiting for his body to catch up. That man had wanted nothing but solitude and the quiet escape of fading away. That man would barely recognize who Elias had become, a guardian, a protector, something close to a father again. "Penny for your thoughts?" Mara joined him, draping one of Sarah's shawls over her shoulders against the evening chill. "Just thinking about time, how fast it moves, how much changes." "Do you miss them, your wife and daughter?" "Every day. But it doesn't hurt the same way anymore. Now it's more like they're part of me, part of who I am. And I think they'd be glad I found you and Luke. Sarah always said love wasn't finite, that there was always room for more." "She sounds like she was wonderful." "She was. You would have liked each other." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching darkness claim the valley. Inside, Luke was reading by lamplight, lips moving slightly as he worked through a chapter book Miss Peterson had loaned him. The scene was so domestic, so normal, that Elias had to remind himself it had once seemed impossible. Winter came again, completing the circle. This time they were ready for it, woodshed full, root cellar stocked, horses shod, and blankets thick. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading and talking, and simply being together. Luke's nightmares had faded to rare occurrences. Mara had grown 3 inches and developed a sharp wit that kept them all on their toes. On Christmas morning, they exchanged simple gifts. Elias gave Luke a pocket knife, carefully explaining how to use it safely. He gave Mara a journal, leather-bound and beautiful, for recording her thoughts and dreams. They gave him a photograph they'd commissioned in town, the 3 of them together, looking like the family they'd become. Elias stared at that photograph for a long time, memorizing every detail. Mara in her good dress, smiling confidently. Luke pressed against her side, eyes bright with life reclaimed. Himself standing behind them, hands on their shoulders, looking almost content. "We look good together," Mara said softly, "like we belong." "We do belong. We're family." The words settled into truth, solid and unshakable. They were family, not by blood, not by any traditional measure, but by choice and commitment and the shared experience of surviving darkness together. They were family because they decided to be, because they showed up for each other day after day, because love wasn't about biology, but about being present and protective and permanent. The years that followed brought their own challenges and triumphs. Mara graduated from Miss Peterson's school with top marks and began teaching younger students herself. Luke grew tall and capable, deciding he wanted to be a veterinarian after helping birth a difficult calf. The ranch prospered, and the leased land continued to generate income for the children's future. Marcus Hutchins died in prison when Luke was 12, a bitter man who'd never accepted responsibility for his crimes. They heard the news with mixed feelings, relief that he could never hurt them again, sadness for the waste of a human life consumed by greed. "Do you think he ever regretted it?" Luke asked. "Killing our parents?" "I think regret requires a conscience he didn't possess," Elias answered honestly. "Some people break in ways that can't be fixed. Your uncle was one of them. I feel like I should feel something about him dying. But I don't. Is that wrong?" "No. You don't owe him grief. He forfeited that right when he chose murder over family." They visited their parents' graves sometimes, keeping them tended and speaking to the memory of people who'd been stolen too soon. But they didn't live in the past. They built toward the future, making plans and dreaming dreams and creating the life James and his wife would have wanted for their children. When Mara turned 18, she made a decision. She would keep the leased ranch but sell a portion of the land to the Johnsons, who'd proved themselves good stewards. The money would fund her and Luke's continued education. The remaining land would stay in the family, generating income and preserving their parents' legacy. "Are you sure?" Elias asked when she told him. "That's your inheritance. Part of it. The rest is here." She gestured around the ranch that had become home. "This is where we grew up, where we became who we are. When Luke's old enough, when he's ready, maybe he'll want to run that other ranch. Or maybe he'll stay here and run this one with you. Or maybe he'll become a veterinarian and do something completely different. The point is, we have choices. We have futures. Because you gave us the space to heal and grow." Luke, now 13 and nearly as tall as Elias, nodded agreement. "This is home. That other place. It's important because it was Mama and Papa's. But this is ours. This is where we became us." Elias felt pride swell in his chest, so profound it almost hurt. These children, no, these young people, they'd taken tragedy and transformed it into strength. They'd faced evil and emerged with their humanity intact. They were everything their parents had hoped they'd be, and more. The seasons continued their eternal rotation. Springs brought new life, summers brought hard work, autumns brought harvest, winters brought reflection. Through it all, the three of them moved together, supporting and challenging and loving each other with the fierce devotion of people who'd chosen to be family. On Elias's 50th birthday, they threw him a surprise party. The house filled with neighbors and friends, people who'd watched their family form and grow over the years. Mary Carson gave a toast that made Elias flush with embarrassment. To a man who opened his door to strangers and discovered family. To children who survived the unsurvivable and taught us all what courage looks like. To a family built not on blood, but on choice, not on obligation, but on love. May you have many more years together, and may the rest of us learn from your example. Later, after everyone had gone home, after Luke had fallen asleep on the sofa and Mara was reading by the fire, Elias sat on his porch and thought about the journey that had brought them here. About a girl with desperate eyes asking for shelter in his barn. About a silent boy who'd lost his voice to trauma. About hired guns and corrupt sheriffs and a murderer brought to justice. About how close he'd come to turning them away that first night. About how his life would have continued its slow fade into nothing if he'd chosen differently. He thought about Sarah and Emma, about the family he'd lost and grieved and would always carry in his heart, And he thought about Mara and Luke, about the family he'd found when he wasn't even looking for one. Love, he'd learned, wasn't finite. It didn't run out or get used up. It multiplied, expanded, grew to encompass everyone you invited in. Sarah had been right about that. She'd been right about a lot of things. The mountains stood eternal against the stars, witnesses to human drama and triumph, indifferent to individual suffering, but somehow making space for it anyway. Elias had stood under these same stars when his first family died, feeling like the world had ended. Now he stood under them with a different family, feeling like the world had been reborn. Inside, Mara looked up from her book and caught his eye through the window. She smiled, that fierce smile that had become so familiar, and mouthed a single word: home. Elias nodded, smiled back, and turned to watch the night sky one more time. Tomorrow they'd wake early, do chores, eat breakfast together. Mara would teach her afternoon classes, Luke would work with the horses, and Elias would tend the ranch that had been his salvation. They'd live their ordinary, extraordinary life, the life they'd fought so hard to claim, the life they'd built from ashes and determination and the stubborn refusal to let darkness win. They were the Boone family. Not by blood, not by law exactly, but by choice and commitment and the daily practice of showing up for each other. They were survivors and healers, teachers and students, forever marked by tragedy, but defined by how they'd transcended it. And as Elias finally went inside, closing the door on the cold night, he knew with absolute certainty that he'd done what he'd set out to do all those months ago. He'd protected these children. He'd given them a home. He'd shown them that family wasn't something you lost once and never found again, but something you could choose to build, brick by brick, day by day, until it stood solid and true. They'd saved each other, in the end. Pulled each other back from edges they'd been too close to falling over. And in saving each other, they'd discovered something more valuable than all the land and money in the territory. The simple, profound truth that love, real love, chosen love, could heal almost anything if you gave it time and space to work. The house settled around them, warm and full, no longer haunted by absence, but blessed by presence. 3 souls who'd found their way home to each other, against all odds and despite every obstacle. 3 people who'd learned that family wasn't about where you came from, but about who you chose to stand with when the world went dark. And in that choosing, in that standing, they'd found not just survival, but life itself, messy and beautiful, painful and joyful, forever changed, but unbreakably whole. They'd found home, and each other, and the courage to face whatever came next together. That, Elias thought as he climbed the stairs to bed, passing rooms where his family slept safe and sound, was worth everything. Worth the fear, worth the fighting, worth opening his door to strangers on a quiet evening when his life had seemed finished. Worth all of it, and more besides, because in the end, they weren't strangers at all. They were family. And family, as he'd learned, was worth dying for. But more importantly, it was worth living for, too.